Separatism and Wexit become hot topics in Canada. I'm Marco Perri. Welcome to the Perri platform. Canada is currently in the midst of talks about separation. Again, some provinces are not entirely happy and are considering the notion of leaving Canada. We've had this happen in the past. One of the more recent examples was Quebec in 1995. They passed a referendum to determine if they could just get up and leave Canada and form their own sovereign nation. The question that they asked their citizens in the referendum was this: do you agree that Quebec should become sovereign, and, having made a formal offer to Canada for a new economic and political partnership with the scope of the bill, respecting the future of Quebec, yada yada yada, that's basically the gist of it. In short, do you agree with us leaving and doing our own thing? That was asked to the citizens of Quebec. 49.4% of respondents said yes, we want out. 50.6% said no, we want to stay. That's crazy. That's about as narrow as you can get. The referendum failed, just barely, and Quebec remained. Now imagine, what if that bill actually passed and Quebec became a sovereign nation? How would they be doing right now? My hunch tells me that they would be doing poorly. And I have a couple reasons too, as to why separatism weakens the whole, Canada, and the individual part, but I'm going to get to that in just a second. So parties like the Bloc in Quebec, they still advocate strongly for Quebec-centered policies, but the talk of leaving isn't as prevalent today. One reason why that is because the sentiments within Quebec, in terms of the population, have shifted. You can see that with the Bloc nearly being wiped out in the previous election 4 years ago. They made a comeback in the most recent one, but that was due to a platform change. They changed their tune. They're talking more about putting Quebec first and not so much about entirely leaving. It's a big difference, and it's more appealing to the people. You can see how well it did when it earned them the third most seats in the federal election of 2019. Of course, the Bloc still talks the talk. They will occasionally refer to Quebec as its own nation, a sovereign piece of land, separate from Canada, but they don't try to enact any policies surrounding that. They just have a heavy favoritism, and you know where their cards lie. It's all Quebec for them. That is appealing to some of the population, having a party entirely dedicated to all of the issues of your single province. I don't think it's good for cohesion, but that's what we have. Now, the fact that separatist notions in Quebec have died down is a good thing, but it does not mean that they cannot come back, especially if other parts in Canada are lighting a flame talking about how badly they want to leave. It could bring back some past sentiments that we don't want. So today, we're facing a new wave of separatism, which has coined the name Wexit. Similar to Brexit, I assume, all these exits, basically. Wexit refers to Western separation within Canada. Alberta, and to a lesser degree Saskatchewan, are leading the change for this idea. They want Canada to be divided west versus east, with Alberta presumably at the forefront. This also is not the first time we've seen these ideas come out of the West, but it seems like this time things may be very different. There is a different reason as to why they want to leave. It used to be more culture-centered. That's really why Quebec was trying to leave as well. It was culture-centered. It was French versus English, and there are tensions rising up because of that. Now with Alberta, though, it seems to be more priority-focused and even more honed in, industry, and job-related. The notion of climate change, it's held in high regard throughout most of Canada, but in Alberta it's a very different story, and that's creating a massive divide between the provinces. The fact of the matter is, Alberta's economy is not set up to be environmentally friendly. They are heavily reliant on things like oil and gas and whatnot, and those industries provide numerous jobs to their population. Good paying jobs at that. Now here's a stat in relation to the context of climate change and these industries. 58% of Albertans are somewhat or very concerned about sustaining a full-time job heading into the future. That's because they realize that their main industries are in danger of being removed. When over half of your population tell you that they fear for long-term employment, that is a terrible sign. It actually sets the groundwork for something like a little bit of a revolution. I don't think it's going to be that extreme, but Wexit is sort of a pseudo-revolution in and of itself. People are trying to separate because they feel it is the only logical choice that they have to sustain themselves. Of course, it's not 58% of Albertans who want to separate. The number is more so around a quarter. 25% of them say they are in favor of that notion, but that's not too far away from the majority that they need. They need another 26%. If these trends continue where people are becoming unemployed, they cannot provide for their family, they need a way to eat, well, I don't see it being so far-fetched that they entertain and possibly pass the idea of separatism. It will allow them, foreseeably, to play to the beat of their own drum. They want their oil industry to thrive. Oil is still a popular resource. We're trying to get rid of it due to climate initiatives, but if Alberta becomes their own government system, well, they can push forward with that all they want, not to be held accountable to things like the federal government. So some reasoning really has to be had here. It is true that it is a good time to shift. We see the dangers of things like these oil and gas industries. We recognize that they are not going to be part of our future. They can't be because we're trying to be more sustainable and we care about the earth a little bit. It's also true, though, that removing those industries will cripple the populace and leave thousands of people unemployed. You would essentially create a poverty province because so many people in that area are reliant on that industry. Then, what do you do after that? Leave them in the dust? The question is, what is the plan? And nobody really is talking about that. There are some people who are suggesting that we call their bluff and play chicken with them. To me, that's an asinine ideology. You egg them on at your own demise. Them leaving Canada won't just hurt them, it will hurt everybody. The truth is they have a legitimate grievance and they need answers, not the woke school telling them how bad they are because they like oil and fossil fuels. The bottom line, the reality is, they don't like that per se. They like money. They like being employed. There's other ways we can deliver that, but this dichotomy is so caught up in itself. It's because you work in these industries, therefore the rest of Canada is going to hate you and condemn you. And I see it on Twitter. A lot of people are very quick to take away the helping hand because of those factors. They don't care. You have polluted the environment, so screw you. That's it. Go leave. It's a bad idea. And it's always so ironic to me when the supposedly compassionate people turn their back on compassion and turn to wrath without even realizing it. It's crazy. A gradual shift away from those industries into more sustainable ones is needed, but it has to come with a plan. A plan that accounts for job loss and provides alternatives to that. But if that's not had, let's say that they do propose to leave Canada. What's the process look like? Essentially, they have to draft a referendum, similar to what Quebec did. Basically, it's a question to ask the populace and get a vote on. But the government is allowed to approve it. They have to inspect it and make sure the question isn't an odd question. So Alberta can't phrase it in a leading way or put whatever they want. It has to be reasonable and has to be approved by the government. Once that happens, a consultation occurs. The government's going to ask all the different stakeholders within that province, such as the political parties, presumably the people there, and whoever else is part of that community decision-making process. Then finally, once that's all done, the votes will come in. If a clear majority votes for it, then it's likely to happen. I must admit, I do think it's somewhat of a remote scenario, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I'm going to disregard the complaints that are coming out of those provinces. As I mentioned, only about 25% of the people there actually support the idea. That would cause the referendum to fail drastically. It'd be very clear that the vast majority do not want to separate, but that's given the now context. I can easily imagine things getting worse in Alberta and Saskatchewan that drives them into a panic. And it makes it seem like that's the only way that they can get things done, especially with a politician at the forefront who is very charismatic and who can convince the populace of those notions. I'm the only way to save your job. You want to provide for your kids? The only answer is this bill. That's a very believable story, depending on how you frame it. And if the federal government does not jump in and say, no, we have another option for you that does not involve you leaving, we have a plan, then what choice do they have? They need to know what's on the table. Fundamentally, I don't support any type of fracturing within our nation. I don't support any separatist notions because I feel it's a short-sighted move that will only weaken us and the province that tries to leave. It's not good for anyone. It's really the federal government's job to mend these rifts and find compromises. If nothing else, that is what bonds us all together. We do have the federal government who is in charge of Canada. You can say our priorities are different, our culture is different, but at the end of the day, we're all Canadian, and that is symbolized via the federal government and the Prime Minister who oversees our entire country. The interesting thing is that these places don't like Trudeau. You can see that in the election results and some of the sentiments that are coming forward now post-election, but that is his job. It's Trudeau's job. He has to find a way, and he's got to do it fast, because I don't like the way these notions are heading. The longer you let resentment brew, the more potent and dangerous it can become. Now, I also want to touch on the more strategic side of things, and reasons why I don't think separatism helps anybody. It comes with a swath of negative consequences. The first is, it weakens Canada's economy. Obviously, when a province leaves, we lose that GDP because they become an independent entity. We lose those factors of production, all those people, it hurts us, and it also hurts that province who left because they're going to have a minuscule piece of the pie. When we all combine, we create a sizable force, but individually, nothing special. At the same time, now we're going to be competing. We're not going to be working together. There's going to be no collaboration. We're both going to be vying to attract companies, try to lower our tax rates to beat each other out, all these things, and it's going to overall weaken us. It'll benefit the companies maybe, the consumer you could say, because that's what competition does. If we're competing trying to offer the best package, the companies are going to be very happy about that, but the citizens in the country are going to feel the brunt of it. On top of that, it's going to weaken Canada's military. The simple fact is this new independent province or country or whatever they become is going to need a security force. They're going to form that based on their own population. That population's army or whatever they are is going to be removed from Canada's. If Alberta were to leave, all of the Albertan recruits are gone. They're going to be called back to Alberta to do their own thing, so they'll have a little weak army, and Canada's army will become weaker in the process. No more one cohesive unit. These individual task forces basically is what's going to be spawning. By that same token, it's going to shatter any sense of patriotism that we have. Being Canadian is going to mean nothing anymore in those places. It's all going to be about the provincial identity. At the same time, how do we go about dividing institutions? We both can't have what was once ours. The Canadian pension plan, how'd you go about withdrawing from that and starting your own? How about the legal structures? How about the international trade agreements? It's unlikely these new independent provinces are going to be able to join them automatically. There will need to be vast deal-making processes in place to create their own. It's also going to complicate how we go about trade, because when we think about geographic location, the Wexit movement, we can't forget about British Columbia, which is also on the west. Let's say that Manitoba and Saskatchewan do become independent. What happens to British Columbia? Do they have to automatically join that movement? Or do we have a Canada where it goes British Columbia, Canada, these two independent provinces literally connected in the middle, and then Canada again? How do we do trade like that? It's going to be highly inefficient because presumably the independent nations are going to have their own set of rules, and we already see that. Interprovincial trade right now, when we're all connected as Canada, is already ridiculous. How much more complicated will it be when we're dealing with sovereign nations? Another question that I ask myself is, dividing and conquering has been a legendary military tactic for so long. Do we really want to do that to ourselves? Divide ourselves intentionally and allow us easily to be conquered? In a world where China and Russia are fast becoming superpowers, I find it extremely unwise to be trying to weaken ourselves right now at this point in time. The bottom line is, a significant chunk of the populace over there in these western provinces is angry. I don't think they truly want to separate though. It's more a medium for them to channel their frustration and get people to listen. This is a pretty serious threat. It's a big deal. I don't think it's going to happen, but that's one way to get eyes on your issue. Thinking through the consequences of separation quickly puts into perspective how bad of an idea it truly is. I think the path forward here is the federal government has to create a plan for economic stimulation. That's really what they want. It's not oil per se. They just want money and jobs and to be able to live. Canada has been falling behind in R&D and technology. We also have a lack in big data trained employees. Canada has a shortage of skilled labor. There are lots of ways to go about this. We can create programs in Alberta and Saskatchewan to update the education of their citizens, to fund new enterprises, to create a gradual plan to reasonably weed them off oil into more sustainable areas. The answer isn't to pull the plug and cripple the citizens immediately. Alberta has a role to play too though. They have to be reasonable as well, and I'm not too sure the current leadership has done that. They can't have outrageous demands. They can't say, we don't care about any of the values of the rest of Canada. We're going to push forward with oil from now until infinity, and we have no plans of changing. They have to be more on board with the idea that change is needed, but we're going to help them do that. We don't want them to lose jobs. We're going to find an efficient way to make this happen. If the politicians can take that kind of mindset and believe that we have their best intentions at heart, well, we can make something happen. But if they refuse to do that, the people have to vote them out and vote in a more level-headed representative. 25% of the populace wants to leave Canada, but the remaining 75% presumably just want improvements and answers, not ultimatums. Let's make use of that before the ratio shifts and we're no longer in a favorable position to bargain. So that brings me to the end of today's conversation. If you enjoyed the content, be sure to leave a review and share. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram at Perri Platform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.